lately it's been in a lot of the headlines that ratings are down in the NBA. I heard a number quoted that's down 28% on ESPN ratings. I can't verify the accuracy of that claim. If someone finds that to be a very inaccurate quote, let us know in the comments. We're certainly not trying to put out any bad information there. Shaq had comments before the season even began and at the start of the season in terms of why ratings are down, etc. And one thing that I continually look upon, and this might be a separate topic, so feel free to separate them if you would like when I throw it to you. I think the NBA for a long time, it's been no secret, has had a global reach in mind. And we've seen that play out. We've talked about on the show with experts covering these players. Why isn't Giannis bigger? We talked to Miran Fader about that, who wrote the book literally on Giannis. We've talked about, why isn't Jokic bigger? I get his calm demeanor, those kinds of things. He's a pretty humble person, pretty modest person, so maybe that's why. But there's also been this tie-in, Luka Doncic. He's kind of like a flamboyant player in terms of how he emotes on the court and how he plays the game of basketball. I mean, it's very, very centered around him and his skill set. So why haven't these players blown up more? And I think part of it is that there may always be a component that domestically in America, the international flavor of the league doesn't play as well to an American audience, fair or unfair. I think you and I go deep into the game and with how we watch it, etc. We love those players. Or at least speaking for me, I love watching all three of those players play. They all bring something great to the game, but maybe it doesn't translate domestically quite as well. And that could be a major undercurrent if NBA ratings are in fact down as to why that's happening. And I think the league has always been willing to take that gamble on, hey, we're going global, we're thinking worldwide rather than just domestic. And I ask this openly. I don't know if there is a breaking point or not with that. At some point, the damage to ratings, I think, could impact TV contracts. That point in time is not now. We've talked about the lucrative deal that we've signed. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking and throw it to you, Justin. Maybe first, let's tackle, are you concerned about ratings down? Are you seeing the same sort of trend? And are you concerned more on the side of like Shaq's comments? Are there problems the league needs to be more proactive about?
Nuanced discussions are not a part of the American discourse nowadays. And I think this is a very nuanced answer that you're asking for.
True.
I think there's several things at play. So, number one is the state of just television, right? Things are really in flux in terms of how we consume media. A lot of older people are traditional. A lot of younger people are not, as demonstrated by our election in terms of the rise of podcasts and new media. So the NBA has been very friendly to, I would think, new media, right? A lot of its athletes, they produce podcasts. We've discussed that with our guests. A lot of the highlights are usually produced online immediately for the consumer to watch. So with whether it's just on social media or on YouTube. So I think that's at play. But ultimately, I think you bring up a good point, and I think it's true. And I think a lot of people, they got on Stephen A. Smith about this, and I think we briefly talked about it too, about Shohei Ohtani, and just about him not speaking English, and he got in a lot of trouble for that. But I think there's a bit of truth to it. Like if you take a look at, right now, the world, I think, is more connected than ever in terms of who's a global star. But in America specifically, which stars have really transcended the American market? Could you name one? Like, I always like using your children as a reference point because they're into what's happening now. Like, I'm old. I don't know what's going on. Are there any international athletes that he's into at all? Like, that's his favorite player?
It's a great question, and I think what pops to kids his age, Steph Curry, like we've talked about on the show, and I think really that's the last American star that has popped on a level like that, speaking domestically. And other stars in the league that have taken the mantle and sort of, grab the MVP, rightfully so. Like Giannis, I don't think, talking large scale domestically, once again, to clarify, I don't think he's done that with the youth like Steph Curry. I don't think any MVP since Steph Curry has done it that way. And I think that is felt. I think you could potentially see, I know there's image concerns and things like that, but Ja Morant, if he had an ascension, you could see maybe potential there. You could see with SGA, but once again, he's Canadian. He's not American, so I don't know if the same potential is there. We got to see them have a little bit more success. Feels like with Steph Curry, that success rose even before he had established himself as an NBA champion and then an MVP level player. So it does feel like there are things lacking. My son likes Jokic, but that's in part because I sort of praise Jokic, with Jokic being one of my favorite players of all time. And so I don't know. I think it kind of shows maybe what is lacking in terms of some of that domestic interest in the league. And we see that expressed.
Yeah, well, it's what's a problem I have with this conversation is, and I think a lot of people will not want to admit this, is that this is out of the control of the league in some case, right? Like in fighting, so we take boxing or MMA, you go through a law where there's not any stars due to multiple reasons, and I think in team sports you have a little bit of a luxury because people are, and I think it depends on which sport. I think the NBA kind of operates more on an individual basis in terms of its star power. I think the league is in a bit of a transition
Yeah.
right now. Like, look at the players that have been popular. Magic Johnson, transcendent talent. Michael Jordan, transcendent talent. Shaq, transcendent talent on and off the basketball court. Kobe, transcendent talent. Steph Curry, revolutionized the three-point, shot as we see it today. But now who's that transcendent figure? Anthony Davis is really good. Giannis is really good. Joel Embiid's really good. Luka, he's really, really good. Is he transcendent? Kyrie Irving, amazing player. Is he a transcendent player that is easy for your casual consumer to understand, your casual fan to latch onto? I don't think so. And I think the league is searching for that. It could be Victor Wembanyama. Could be. I think he has a lot of potential. That could happen. But I think the league is in a bit of a transition in terms of finding that star. That's not my predominant issue with the ratings being down. My issue is, I think, with the league itself, the competitive balance. That's something the league can control, right? You take a look at what the product is out on the floor, and with everything being more expensive, everybody's attention being more separated than ever, there's got to be a reason to watch these games. I mean, for yourself, for your family, for myself, like there's a 30-point blowout. And let's say, you want to come up to Denver and watch the Nuggets play the Rockets. And if there's a blowout of 50 points, like, and if the starters get benched, like, do you want to take that trip again?
Exactly.
I mean, you're a hardcore fan, but you have to weigh the pros and cons. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money in the 90s. I mean, it's a lot of money in any period. So for your consumer, what's being offered on the court, I think there needs to be some changes made in terms of the product and fixing the competitive balance, because I am, even though I don't like it, I mean, we've discussed this many a times with the 82 game schedule. I think we both agree there should be less games. However, that's not the world we live in. And with TV contracts, they want the maximum amount of games. Honestly, I see them adding more games to the schedule during the regular season, to be honest. But if you're going to do that, you've got to fix the competitive balance. And right now, as I see on kind of a nightly basis, and really is pronounced during the playoffs last year, is that there is not enough really competitiveness when we see these games. Like in the NBA, there should be no 50-point blowouts, period. Yeah. I don't care how many 3-point shots there are. There should be no 50-point blowouts. There should be no 40-point blowouts. 30 points I can see.
It should be very rare.
I can live with that here or there. Rare. Like we're talking about like once a year and somebody has like a 60-point game or something. Like a unicorn type situation. But instead, I feel like we're seeing that more on a regular basis, especially in competitive situations when we reach the playoffs. And where there's so many blowouts, that tells me that the players don't care when there's a blowout. Like, I don't mind a 10-point loss or a 20-point loss when somebody's hot, but when it comes to games that matter when we're seeing such a lopsided just beatdown of a team for a certain amount of games, your fan base is not going to watch. And so, I mean, right now, it's just if we have casual fans that might ask, "Hey, what's going on in the NBA, and should I watch?" I mean, are yes, I mean, there's players to see. The talent's there. I think I think it's. I agree with Bill Simmons. He was talking about this. I think they're more talented overall than the previous eras. But in terms of a product every night, dumping money on League Pass or paying money to go to a game in arena. I mean, all your arena lights and bells and whistles are not going to fix the fact that the product stinks. So I just think that the NBA, there's got to be more of a, as the money goes up, you got to drop the hammer in terms of really fixing the product that's on there.
I agree with just about everything you said there, and I'll add a few points just because I think it all ties in together. So I don't think we really need to go point by point with what you just said. I don't even necessarily think that the number of games have to come down necessarily, but there's a lack of hustle involved with all the things that you just described there. And I think part of that is tied to the 3-point shot, because while it is a high indicator of talent that has increased over the course of the year, in a lot of cases, it's smart ball movement, it's smart spacing. It is a lower effort level way to play the game, I would say, even though it is an intelligent way to play the game in terms of with how spacing is. When you look at the, to put it this way, kind of elbow grease of the league in the 80s and 90s. You have the post battles, things like that. You see the grind that goes on that. The grind is very much still a factor in the NBA, but the way we view it and the way it's expressed is a lot differently. I would say the grind now is number of reps that starts in AAU that we've talked about. The grind is the mileage on these games with the increased number of possessions and faster pace. So, but to fans that grew up with the old NBA, etc., it's not a smooth or direct transition to watch the game now. It's very, very different. And I think to many traditional fans of basketball, it is perceived as a lower effort way to play the game. And then that in turn is perceived as players do not care about the game. And that kind of goes in line with clips that you're hearing now that are getting popularized. I think Shaq has one of them. I think Draymond Green has one of them, just in terms of players that are coming to play. And I think I told you about one with DeMar DeRozan as well. I think is more what I'm thinking of. But players that are very talented, but maybe don't have the same love and appreciation for the game. Now, I don't want to ascribe intention and love of the game or lack thereof to any player going right now. But a couple other points I just want to point out really quickly on this larger topic. Right now, you look, shout out to Adam Kribley. You should go check out our podcast with him that we just dropped. And there's a YouTube clip from that comparing the NBA of the 70s to now. There's lack of parity in the league. There's another thing that's similar with the NBA in the 70s, which was a time of struggle for the NBA. There's lack of villains as well. There's lack of dynasties. There's lack of villains. There's less for fans to care about when we're in a state that's like this. I don't think all of that, I mean, you wouldn't want the NBA pushing their hand on the scales, so to speak, to make those things happen. But it feels like right now, like, am I going to watch to root against or for any given team? There's less passion behind that compared to even the most recent era in the 2010s, if we want to just look at it from there. And like you said very well, I think it's in part just case of circumstance with where the league is now in transition. I think in some ways, I also would say the media does this to the league unintentionally. So I think there is a big problem right now with star fatigue. I think the amount of clicks and coverage that LeBron James gets, and LeBron is fantastic, but the fact that these players who were in their heyday the last decade still are playing, and that's fair. I'm not asking for anyone to retire, but the amount of coverage that they're getting is equal to what it used to be or very, very close to it. I think suffocates a little bit of possibility of narrative, because those players you mentioned who were questioning if they're transcendent, I think many of them at least have the talent to be, and I would assume you would probably agree with that. But part of the problem may be that their narrative is being choked off by legacy greats who are still around, but let's be honest, probably don't have a chance of really being in title contention.
So I will
Sure.
disagree with you, and I'll ask you a question. So maybe your school is different, but I don't know. Did you pay attention to like student council or who was class president, like any of that?
Definitely not.
Okay, but stereotypically, like the stereotype is like the popular kid usually wins. Am I right or wrong? Usually, compared to the person that's most
I think that's
qualified,
fair.
like usually it's a popularity.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
fair to
I would
say.
agree
Okay,
with that.
so I think that same logic applies to
Mm,
this. So look at what happened this past weekend with the Jake Paul fight versus
mm,
Mike Tyson. So there's plenty of great fighters, but people want, microwave easy stories to consume. Mike Tyson back in the 80s was the one of the most frightening boxers, in history. You know his narrative, and he was a compelling media figure, whether you like him or hate him. Same thing with Jake Paul. If those two didn't exist, to me, Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano, who was the co-main event of that Netflix fight, they're not fighting Cowboy Stadium. And that attention is not going to them due to our society of them. They're great fighters and they have compelling personalities. They, whatever, for how many reasons we can go down another podcast, but the bottom line is they don't have that compelling narrative. Same thing goes for
mm,
the NBA. If LeBron retires tomorrow, who's going to take that spot that's compelling? Giannis?
mm,
I mean, he's been in the league for a long time. I mean, I don't see a bunch of Giannis fans appearing out of thin air. Unless he's, breaking a bunch of records, unless he's playing spectacularly. I mean, look at Jokic right now, which we're going to talk about later. I mean, he is playing at a super high level. He's been dominating the league for years, but I don't really see telling his story now that LeBron is gone. I don't see it attracting a ton of new Joker
mm,
fans for the Nuggets. The bottom line is that our society wants easy to consume narratives. That's why Tiger Woods was so popular, because he was making history in a predominantly white sport. And he was just breaking records. He's easy to consume, and it was very attractive to a casual audience. Same thing with LeBron. You all know his narrative. And right now, there's not a narrative that is easily consumable by the American public, in my opinion. But I will agree with you in terms of the media. Could they do a better job of not covering LeBron every single day? For sure. I agree. At the same time, if he retires and they're getting into the nitty gritty, I don't see the NBA's ratings going
mm,
up. I don't. I mean, we're in a society of typically with, at least I'll go with Americans. I can't speak for the rest of the world, but with Americans, we want easy to consume narratives, right? People that are hateable, people that make history, and I think people that are transcendent. I mean, those three things are easy for your fans to understand. So at this point with the NBA, it's just kind of bad luck.
mm,
And it's in a bit of a transitional state. I think this is the perfect time for that transitional state, because right now, a lot of these networks need content. And the number one prime reason for content is sports. It's live sports. It's live, and it's always changing, as opposed to a television show where you need to constantly, pay the actors and do all this. Live entertainment is a lot more attractive, and that includes the NBA. That's why they got a huge television rights deal. So I don't know. I personally view it as the league in a bit of a flux right now, and we'll see next year. Cooper Flagg's coming into the league. I mean, he is a highly touted rookie if he does come out of Duke next year. And I think we saw with what happened, with Caitlin Clark. Very compelling for a myriad of reasons. The WNBA, I think, did a decent job of capitalizing on that. So it's about stars. I mean, let's keep it real. I mean, there was no Caitlin Clark. I think you would see a steady rise of ratings as we marked on the show, but the explosion is due to Caitlin Clark along with Angel Reese in terms of the college game. And right now with the men, you don't
mm.
have that. I would say I think it's more on just the natural flow of things and just the rise of international talent not being attractive to your casual sports fan.
Yeah, this is one where I'd really love to see some comments going on your guys' thoughts
Yeah,
on this.
please.
And again, I don't really, you know, claim to know even the answer behind, these questions, but I think they're interesting ones to ask, and I think they're really important ones that I'm sure the NBA is asking behind the scenes in terms of developing and keeping the league going and keeping the league in a pole position in terms of both domestically and globally from what they're looking at. So let us know your guys' thoughts on the ratings and what's going on with the NBA right now. I mean,